This kind of stuff is enough to piss a guy off. Same company makes the tank and this sending unit drop in. However, the bolt pattern is different. And presumably these things were made for these tanks. And the bolt pattern doesn't even match. Ridiculous. I want to try to seal these fenders up because I had to cut up so high for getting the suspension in here, and they were rusted out anyway. But I want to make sure they're covered up so that we're not having water and dirt and road debris bouncing up onto the engine. So I'm just making a template here out of some cardboard. A little bit of a notch cut in it to clear the upper control arm. And we're going to go over and see if I can cut that out of plastic, and then with the plastic I should be able to heat it up and form it a little bit. Nothing about this is super accurate. We're just wanting to kind of make some outlines. There, now we can snip that out. Okay, I don't know how much shape it's actually going to hold, but it bends easy with the heat. So if it's hitting something, when I go to put it in the car, I can get it attached, and then anything that's hitting, I should be able to just heat up and it'll soften up, and then whatever it's hitting will hold it into shape. They work pretty good. Being black, this is already kind of hard to see on camera, but that's kind of the point, is to hide this stuff. I decided to forego the bend and just cut a clearance, although having the bend in there made it way easier to get this cut out. Anyway, a little bit of trimming on the ends, and I could slide this right down in there. We're on top, we're covered over the frame. We're sneaking past the steering back here. There's only a little bit exposed around the upper control arm. And I think I'm just going to start putting a few bolts or screws in here to kind of hold it around the bigger bends. And then we'll just kind of heat that up with the torch, and this should all settle right in there. And down on the frame side, I really don't care how close it fits. I mean, because it can flap around a little bit. I'm not going to attach it on the bottom. I just want it to be there for kind of a splash guard. The previous builder did a nice job with making closeout panels. They're maybe a little more complicated than they probably needed to be. I'm not knocking it because it accomplishes a very, very good thing, which is making sure that air is going through the radiator. So I will be reusing as much of these closeout panels as possible. I had to do a little trimming down here on the bottom because our frame changed. I also realized I got these two support brackets on backwards, so I'll have to flip them side for side. But once I do that, then I know I got the front and side closed off, other than the bottom area, but there's more panels over there for that, to make sure that we're getting air through our radiator. Here's the fit up right now. I have elected to rivet it in place. I've got 3 rivets in there right now, just to kind of get it around the curvature. Was thinking about a 4th one right here, but it's kind of a tight spot to get into with the drill. I could always go from the back side. However, I want to see how this settles out. You know, we've got clearance down here to the steering, the back. I mean, like, that part probably isn't too bad. Right up here, though, we're on top of the pivot for the suspension, which again isn't going to hurt anything, but I'm just wondering if I can heat that plastic up and get it to relax. We'll see how that comes out. I added in that 4th rivet, but overall the top pulled in and relaxed pretty nice. Bottom got a little funky on me. I kept tried to put this bend in there and it was making a crease, and I tried kind of pushing on it with a hammer, and then it was extra soft. So not the prettiest outcome there, but the big thing is it's got that whole big gap mostly sealed off now, so we don't have to worry about water spraying in. Put a few more of these closeout panels on. This one's kind of loose until the whole front clip goes on, or the bumper, fascia, whatever you want to call it. The front end. As we're able to clip our wires up in place, reutilize some of the holes going through. This passenger side one's going to have to go over the top of the radiator, and then we got our fan. But I ran out of enough solid plastic, so I'm going to have to wait a couple of days while some more of that comes before I can do the same thing to the other side. But I'm just going to come down here, work on the wiring. I got a pass through for being able to do the blinker and the horn. So we'll get that wired. I can actually wire this whole side, so I can wire those things plus the headlight right now anyway. We got more of the front closeout panels put on, and I've been fighting with this radiator for a while now. It seems pretty clear that whoever built this car before most likely just put it in place and drilled holes through everything that was there without actually measuring anything. And it makes it super hard to get it back into place. It was also hard mounted with bolts. I put a captured nut style body clip on in order to make it much easier to install. I've also had to slot the holes in the mounting positions as well as on the radiator mounting positions, just because of where everything's ending up. Like, I need the wiggle room in order to make this fit, and it had absolutely no adjustment before. The rubber isolation that I used is actually just some cut up radiator hose. It's not going to give it a ton of movement, but it's still probably better than mounting the dang thing solid, so. This is what I pulled out of the driver's door, and this is what was in the car going into the center console. It used these contacts for the suicide door setup. And while those are probably okay when they function correctly, they kind of got corroded, and the connections on the backside pretty much suck. And I didn't have a good way to make a better connection, so I'm hardwiring this door. And along with doing so, putting everything in proper covering, making sure it's zip tied in place, and we're running it along the door here. This must have been the original plan of the previous builder, because they already had this hole cut, and they had a hole cut here. The problem is that was a really dumb place to put it, because as you close the door, it'd pinch the wires. The difference here is, we'll have the panel covering up this. We're only going to have this little bit exposed, but I had to come in here and cut more material out of the way, and I put this clamp on here to make sure that it swings with the door, so as the door moves, it's having free motion into the void and can not pinch the wires. I just largely don't trust these contact things, especially when there's, you know, water obviously has been getting in here and corroding on them, and the backside just has like a push connection. I don't know if you can kind of see up in there. Yeah, the backside just has those stud push connections you can barely see there. and I just don't think that those were going to be great long-term as far as reliability of the operation, because when I took this car apart, I was already having trouble with the windows and the door locks operating properly. So just getting rid of that whole setup is probably going to be better long-term. Trying to keep moving along on the wiring here. I've got both doors wired into the center console area for switches. I've got both door poppers just wired up. I had to pull this panel back out, put some paint on it today, and finally got all of this stuff mounted and wired up. So kind of slowly narrowing everything into the center console, making sure I got all the wires I'm going to need. You know, we got some HVAC controls that may or may not reach the center console, so I'll have to deal with some of that stuff later. I mean, I got room here if I extend one wire, but there is so much time into this wiring right now. Probably around 45 hours as it sits right now. And I'm still waiting on some more loom because I ran out of loom. The kit didn't have enough. Hopefully I can start putting the interior back in this thing tomorrow, but we're still just going to have a mess at the center console, but I'd rather have the interior back in, all of the stuff at the center console, and then I can worry about actually doing the center console towards the end. I'm finally beginning to see light at the end of this wiring tunnel. Enough so that I got everything on the floor wrapped. This is all center console things for buttons and switches. And the radio. Got a few heater controls up here still under the dash, but some of that might have to get extended and stuff. It all depends on what we end up doing with the center console, and I don't know what we're doing with that yet. I know the one that was in here is not really a viable option, at least not in my mind, because we got to add the floor shifter and some other stuff, and it's going to completely change that thing. The fabric's going to be all wrong. We're going to have to modify a whole bunch. So we're going to have to basically start from scratch on that. But it feels like such a big milestone to get far enough to get the carpet and the back seat put back in. I finally got all the interior back in other than the center console, because we're going to have to build a new one. I'm dreading this a little bit just because, I mean, I got all these wires laying everywhere that need to go somewhere, and I really have no idea what kind of dimensions we're going to end up with for our center console anyway. I can't even reuse some of the old one because of the way that's set up. It's got a big curve up here. And it's just where the flat spot's going to be to try to put the shifter in is immediately in the way of the cup holders, kind of a thing. And then it had all the buttons like right about here. And we're going to have to move some of that stuff back, so the window, door locks, and poppers are going to be back here farther. Which will be alright, because this seating position's a little too far forward for me anyway, so a shorter person would probably be sitting here, and it's still easily to get at. Up front, trying to put a radio back in this thing, I don't know. It would be really cool to do the dash radio that looks, factory kind of a thing. However, this is a very unique one as far as the years go, and I haven't seen any direct replacements for this. Maybe there's somewhere it gets sent and upgraded, but I don't know if we're even going to get that far into it. At the bare minimum, maybe even just hooking up a plain old simple Bluetooth setup would be easy, because then really, that's what I did on the golf cart, and it's just a volume knob. So, yeah, it clicks, it comes on, it's volume after that, everything else is controlled off your phone. And that'll clean things up, and really that would go down to where it could be just a single switch on the dash somewhere, or the center console. I don't know, we'll see how all that plays out. Mostly I just want to I got the shifter mounted in here now, that's in a nice place. I want to try to clean up some of this wiring. So I have switches, I know about where they're going to want to be. I could just leave an extra, 8 to a foot of wiring extra on there, and it'll just coil up under the center console, and then it has enough room that when the center console needs to be lifted off, everything can be up in a nice place to be unplugged. So in that case, almost the longer the better. I've got, you know, switch wires coming off of the relays under the dash. They're not long enough to make it back here, so I'm going to have to kind of decide what I'm going to do with that, if I'm going to be forced to extend them a little bit, or maybe I can move the switches forward farther. We'll see. I want to kind of just lay all this out. Some of it right now is the trigger wires for the components. All of that I can wire up right away because all of the switches are on the signal side of the relay, and there's multiple wires going into that, so it's going to be kind of a mess underneath here, but it'll be better than what was in the other center console. Once I get all that figured out, it'll kind of tell me where I need to put stuff. We also want to get some cup holders in here so they can be forward, back, whatever. We'll figure that out last. It'll just be where they fit, kind of a thing. So I'm setting up the window switch, and I'm wanting to test to make sure that it's operating in the direction I want to operate. Just because I have no idea what the stuff was in the door and versus what the switch operates like, because if I push it one way, I don't know which ones it's contacting. I could test that, but then I also don't know what was up, what was down in the door, so I used connectors where I can reverse them if I need to, and then we'll shrink everything to fit afterwards. That way I can make sure the switch is operating in the direction I want. So if I jumper this stuff, let's see if we do the driver's side first. So we have illumination. So the power that will come here is going to be a key on one. So, and let's see, how is that operating in the car, modern car? Yep. Forward is down. That's up. Okay. I like that. Especially because my blue and blue match up in the colors I made. Now, if I jump over to the other switch and I go down, that's down. And that's up. Excellent. Nice when you guess correctly the first time. Capping off the front of the frame rails on both sides so that I can put a little short stub pipe off of there for our new bumper. This car only had sheet metal across the front before and basically no crash protection whatsoever. So we're going to make a bumper from basically the equivalent of a bash bar. I got this multiple bends in here just to get it to kind of line up with that curve pretty decent. I don't want it to be perfect because I don't want to make it a pain in the butt to fit. But at this point, now I'm ready to put the front end back on. It's got a whole bunch of bolts everywhere, kind of a thing, and then we'll be able to snake that bar up in from the bottom. Figure out how long we need for a little piece of stub on there, kind of get that tacked in there and fit it up, take it back out, weld the stubs to that, and then we should have full access to be able to weld it on with it in place. So I test fit the bar up behind the front end of the car. I needed 3-inch roughly. Weirdly enough, 3 inches is exactly what I cut off each end earlier. So that's with it kind of pushed up tight to the sheet metal. I know that's going to move back a little bit, but as I cope the 3-inch lengths, they'll get a little shorter in overall length. I'm using the table here to square the pieces up. I marked where the frame was on each side. That way I know about the position so I can keep repeating as I grind to fit them. And then I know that once I have it fit, it will be keeping everything pretty much square. The only slight difference I might have is if them frames aren't perfectly the same length. Ended up not being able to fit it up with the front end in place, so I had to go back and forth a couple of times. I ended up having to trim about 3/8 of an inch off the ends of these to tuck this in. And actually, right now, if I fit up the front end, I should be able to get everything bolted up and it'll be pressed right tight to the back of the sheet metal. So that'll be good for, maximum crash protection at that point, and it'll help stabilize the sheet metal a little bit. Not that it needs it, but it's just where we're at with it, and I didn't want to trim back too much more. Not more than I had to anyway. So I just sprayed some paint on it while it's still hot. Hopefully it'll bake on and dry nice, and then I can get the front end fit up. So this tank is supposed to fit this car, but you'd never know it because this add-in EFI sump thing for this tank, I had to modify the holes on top because they didn't fit the spacing quite right. I had to oversize the holes in order to get them to start into the tank and get that to line up. Now I'm trying to put it in the car, and where it mounts to the car goes right over the top of this. There's literally no way this tank fits. Not with this EFI setup in here. So it's like, what on earth was this designed for? The same company makes tank made the insert. Did they ever even try to fit one of these in this car? So now I need to decide if maybe there's a different tank I can get to put all this stuff in, or more likely what's going to happen is I'm going to have to modify the car to be able to mount this tank properly to then be able to get everything to fit. Finally was able to get this to work. That cross beam or support beam up there, I had to notch it out in order to clear. Running the feed line was the only way I could go around the outside here. So this will end up trying to get tucked up and mounted. This stuff's got to get a little more of a hard point yet. This is the return line. I ended up snaking through there. I'm much happier with how the vent line came out because it runs with the wires and the grounds. All that's tucked pretty nice. Otherwise, these are my feed and return fuel lines. They angle over to the frame and run all the way down the frame. That took a while to fabricate too, but I just need a little more of a hard point up here to mount off of. And I need a fitting for the return line yet, but it's been a few days since getting the gas tank in on the 50, and been trying to plug away on as much stuff as possible. So far I have the transmission lines fabbed up. However, I'm waiting on a couple of fittings for the ends. Same thing with the brake lines. I've got the fronts and driver's rear hooked up. I'm waiting on more line and fittings to do the passenger rear. In the meantime, I cut up the exhaust that had been on the Corvette. We should be able to make it work on the 50 by just adding a bunch of straight sections. So I've got some tubing coming for that. And we'll be able to reuse the mounts off of the Corvette also, which would be pretty nice because we can use the mount on the trans and the mount on the rear end. We just gotta make sure that we got the length in between, which is why it's cut in two pieces. I've also been plugging away on getting the battery fit up. I had to make a tie down for that, as well as getting the wiring to the battery set up. I've been able to get the alternator wire run. We got the ground and the positive side that hook into the battery, we'll be able to reuse those from the Corvette. I did have to make a little bushing stud kind of a thing as far as hooking up the alternator and the power for our solenoids, just to be able to get something off of there. And then I was able to just modify the Corvette plug in order to make all of that work, and then that gets our power distribution handled. So at this point we're just ready for a new battery. The drive shaft has also been measured and dropped off at the shop. I was able to take the original drive shaft that was in the 50 and we're just going to get it shortened, new U-joints put in, and then I'll make it work. Luckily the U-joints are all the same size, matching up with the Corvette rear end, so nothing's got to change there, but we'll put new stuff in anyway. Also have a few more just odds and ends on the way to finish a few things up. Like we still got to hook up the cigarette lighter, the power point underneath the dash, because the old one had a different plug-in style with just like a round stud on the back, and it wasn't anything that I could get an eyelet on. So I got to get a different one that's got a spade hookup. Once we have that, we can put that back in the dash, wire it, and then finish up the dash stuff. And really at that point I'm just going to be left with figuring out what to do for a center console, and I just need to go through a little bit more wiring, make sure I can get all the buttons and switches and everything functional, because I want to have everything buttoned up before I even hook up the battery for the first time. And everything's going to have, you know, plenty of extra wire on it, so that wherever I decide to put things on the center console will be easy to get them there without having to add extensions or anything weird like that.